Hi, my name is Ginny, also known as Two-Thirds Lotus, and this clip is part of my series analyzing the Essential Bukowski, edited by Abel DeBrito. Nothing has been edited out, so you're seeing this exactly as it was streamed on Twitch, with all the imperfections and tangents of a live stream. If you want to learn more or catch me live, make sure to check out the description, otherwise enjoy the incredible work of Charles Bukowski.
Oh, chat's moving. Chat is moving. Welcome back, everyone. Or welcome back to me. Lol Cynical Drunks. Yeah, Bukowski's classic Bukowski word. Drunks. What's been going on with everyone here in the Lotus verse? We're just having a great stream today. We got our raid earlier from Taste of Magic. Some new friends today. And it's a very good time. Chilling with knitting. Luxurious. I want to learn how to knit. My client's sister is the same way. She knits to focus. Ah, that's interesting. I would focus on knitting if I was doing it, and then I would mess up. I am injected with the fuel of rebellion that hinders my insanity, only to have each brain cell rattle against the bars that surround my bathtub. Yeah, the border between caffeinated and hypomanic is a narrow one, and that sounds quite like something I would say in that state. I was just getting caught up with chat. Yeah. Okay, Bukowski. What were we talking about? Glorifying art, yet also not. So, this is where we have to talk about... Oh! Is it time to talk about the other half of the poem? We haven't talked about much of the poem at all. This could be like a 4-hour discussion. This poem's brilliant. Let's talk about after the green line that I drew. Because pretty much everything has been talking about this stuff, and it's surprisingly not marked up, given the amount we've been talking, because we've been going sort of metatextual, right? But such is life. A poem is this city now. 50 miles from nowhere, 9:09 in the morning, the taste of liquor and cigarettes. So this is Bukowski describing a scene. This goes from Bukowski talking hypothetically to Bukowski jumping into really like his experience. This city now, 50 miles from nowhere. What is he talking about? Well, if you are far from nowhere, then you are going to be somewhere for the next 50 miles. This is actually just talking about, I'm basically certain, the LA sprawl. I think a lot of you, like, Europeans would be shocked at the degree of sprawl in Los Angeles. I don't think cities in Europe sprawl in quite the same way. I could be wrong, but LA is abhorrent. LA is huge. It goes forever. LA is like absurd. Same with Phoenix. These are like infinite cities, right? So since you're 50 miles from nowhere, if you go 50 miles or 49 miles in any direction, you're still going to be somewhere because you are still in the city, right? You're 50 miles away to get to nowhere, which is the disgust, right, that I feel with the city. But he's okay with it because he's coping because he's an LA denizen. You mostly make hats and blankets. That's cute. That's awesome. Brian, have I considered running an online class about deconstructing poetry? This is my online class on deconstructing poetry. I presume you mean something more structured, either like a sort of, like paid video lesson type thing, or like with people, like in a sort of call or something like that. But I think I absolutely would love that idea. Like, I think that's brilliant. And would be fun to make it almost a specific course, because a lot of the times in like the Bukowski work, the Poets of Twitch work, we do a lot of deconstructing and talk about different ideas, but like, you know, I only talk about now forced association because it happens to come up in this poem, and it becomes sort of difficult. Like, it feels almost incohesive. Like, you couldn't watch through all of my stuff and get a full picture of what I talk about. Just because, I mean, I guess you watch all of it, but you would have to watch through everything to get everything. It's not distilled, it's on stream, it's sort of sprawling out in time, right? And I think I would probably be able to make a much more intentional, like, half-hour, 45-minute video, throw it up on YouTube, or make it a series, and you know, make that something that could be on like a Patreon, right? That I think would really function much better as a class. Something I do want to do is start doing poetry class streams, which would be similar, but more of like a live teaching, where I choose a topic and I say, today we're learning about the sonnet, right? Not that I would want to talk for that long about the sonnet, but you could talk about history of the sonnet, the form, the different people, the different styles. Like, you could make that a multiple hour discussion, and you couldn't even have that discussion even if you're reading an actual sonnet on stream, just because you're also looking at the poet itself, or the poet's tree itself, right? Especially, you cannot imagine cities that size. It's absurd. The Korean hottie you're talking to is from Seoul. Yeah, like that. Oh, you had it flipped, like 50 miles from somewhere? Yeah, that's how I read it at first, and then I realized, I'm like, that's a really good line. I'm just good at it. I'm well-spoken and calming and know my shit. Thank you. Thank you. I know plenty of artists who don't know how to talk about their own art. Oh, right. You have the YouTube. I always forget because I try to stay off media. Yeah, that's fine. You should be doing that. You should be staying off social media and media. And she's on TikTok and Insta. Guys, the socials I'm on everything. I'm on X, Insta, Blue Sky, Threads, YouTube, TikTok, Twitch, you could call Discord, Reddit, but not really like as 2/3 Lotus posting my things. It's bad. You make an excellent teacher, or at least a great moderator for discussions about poetry. You refuse to interact with TikTok. Good. Keep hearing about Blue Sky? I have no clue. It's just a sort of Twitter clone, I would say. Yeah, decentralized Twitter, which is really good. It's full of a ton of queers and artists and like people who look like us, I guess. And it doesn't have like advertisement. So it's so like quaint in its sort of simple beauty and actually seeing real posts. I do like Blue Sky. It's not owned by Elon Musk is the big selling point. Yeah, and many people have been fleeing Twitter to Blue Sky every time Elon Musk does something dumb, right? But that's a great one. Yes. So I have lots of ideas for teaching, you know. Yeah, it's an app. It's also a website. You could download it. You could use it on browser. Just BLUESKY. Shortened to BSKY. Yeah, so grew up with the phrase, there's an app for that, back when apps were new. Oh gosh. Ick. That's so ick. Yeah. No. Sorry. Listen, I'm 40. I know. I'm sorry. You're twice my age, old man. But you said a point earlier in chat, author Brian Liu. You said, I seem to know my art, or like, I seem to be able to talk about art in ways that other artists do not. Oh, wait, I missed a chat from Scarlett. Were you asking my blue sky? My blue sky is TWOTHIRDSLOTUS. Like, everything on the socials is just also 2/3 lotus, except it's spelled out TWO. Twitch is the only place where it's a number, because I'm weird like that. I should probably change it to TWO while I still have time, but I think it reads better as a number on Twitch because it's all lowercase for some reason. You got it. Awesome. And I post like stream announcements, and I put a poem on each of those every day. So I have a poem that's only on X every day, a poem that's only on Threads, a poem that's only on Blue Sky, and I write those every morning. So you get some of my actual art. But Brian Liu, you said, I need to find the exact chat that you said. I hope I do archive those poems for when the social medias implode. They're only on there. Like, I write them in the post box. So I probably need to put them somewhere safer. Okay. No, I know plenty of artists who don't know how to talk about their own art. I think that's okay, right? Because art and, like, let's take poetry. I think poetry and poetic analysis, or even artistic analysis, are separate arts entirely. And I think to write poetry is this sort of just generative thing. The words come out, they can go. Sometimes we don't even understand how the poems get created. And then separately is analysis, where you're looking at what is here and trying to work backwards and also associate. There's so much association you have to do, and my mind has always worked in this way of taking things and making connections, right? I just very quickly take disparate ideas and say, what if this connects to this? And I'm okay with making these hypotheticals. Maybe it doesn't, but usually it does, because everything connects. Man, I can't even explain my process for any type of art. Yeah. So I did have a fight with my own principles, though. I was like, what if I do a daily, weekly poem on TikTok, but I hate TikTok? I didn't know how to resolve the conflict. Okay. I think... So it sounds... Yeah, you're a spoken poet. That's right. If you hate TikTok, you could do it on Instagram. Reels. You could do it on YouTube Shorts, which I have found is interesting. So the algorithms work differently. When you're small on TikTok, everything you put out will get like 100, 200 views and die. Unless it catches on, then it'll go higher, right? And they're usually just people who see it and then swipe away. YouTube Shorts, I would say it's easier to get up to like a point of like 500, 1,000 views on like a short form video. And I haven't had anything like succeed beyond that, but I'd say I'm getting like regularly higher views on YouTube for poetry, and maybe that's just because there's like a saturation thing with the amount of stuff on TikTok. I'm not sure. I think YouTube is a better space for generally like educationally branded content than TikTok, so I'm not sure. Man, I can't even I don't fully understand the hate for TikTok. Like, I get it's toxic, but so are most apps. I think one thing about TikTok that people are afraid of is looking at others and seeing how addicted they are to it. In that, I think TikTok was the big popularizer or the making clearer of internet addiction. TikTok is also like the pillar and paragon of like Gen Alpha and what people describe as brain rot, which is going to definitely detract from some people's perception of it. I suppose what I don't like is that Tickety as I call it sometimes, is that my wife checks her phone without really thinking about it. Yeah. The app starts up, the video starts in the middle of our conversation. Yeah. Oh my god, that is the worst when people are on their phone with you and like thoughtlessly, right? And not even like that they're thoughtless toward you, that it's like this brainless thing of like, I'm here, I'm in front of you. Hi. I think the worst thing is definitely the interjection of social media as a barrier and something that supersedes physical interaction, where people will sacrifice their physical relationships for online ones. That's terrifying to me. There's always been internet addiction and brain rot. I do know that. There always has been. I mean, you go to early YouTube and just like the brain rot there and like ironic stuff. Like brain rot is sort of a culture of the internet. I think TikTok is when it really was made clear to a broader audience. It's outside of those who are like in the know on the internet. Anyone who spent time on the internet knows like we're brain rotted, we're irony poisoned, we're degenerates. This is how we are, right? We make up words for things that go in and out of style, you know, it's how it goes. Memetics. And TikTok showed that in a very real way to people who didn't know that. That's where I would say TikTok plays a role. Been interrupted. Yeah, interrupted by an app. On those grounds alone, I just can't deal. But yeah, it's nuts in the last decade. Yeah. I had someone say how great it was to just be with friends IRL while he was scrolling. That's terrifying. We were degenerates before too, but it wasn't documented. Yeah. Next time you go to dinner out, use this rule. Everyone put your phones in the center of the table. First person to check us to pay the bill? Sheesh. Dude. Sorry, I'm curmudgeoning and derailing your thoughtful... No. We've been very derailed today. I think the more energy I have and the more excitement I have to talk, the more I get derailed. But this is honestly kind of how I like it. I like it to flow from the poetry back because we talk about heady stuff. And it's kind of difficulty, right? It's difficult because we need to come up for air for sometimes with stuff like this, right? So I don't find it an issue as long as it doesn't become more of the stream. And I do appreciate also the directions back. I read a ton growing up and played philosophical puzzle games, wrote poetry. I think my brain is immune to brain rot. Time to gloat. There you go. I'm proud of you, High Caliber. To watch Look Up. What is it? Just Look Up? I haven't seen that though. I don't know what it's about. Blame parents for why people are so obsessed with the internet. Yeah, I think... I mean, it is a beautiful teacher, but I think it doesn't teach a lot of things that parents need to teach to their kids. That's true. So you're on with that. It's a highly satirical movie from... Yeah, I remember it from a few years ago. It was huge. It blew up. Everyone loved it. And then, like, all the millennials, it was actually, like, y'all who were like, oh my gosh, this movie is so poignant, and it contextualizes our life in an internet age, and then no one changed anything. You loved it, though? Okay. Good to know. Y'all, let's jump back to Bukowski. And it's interesting because I think every time that we've had these sort of discussions, it does reflect back on the poem. But we were talking about 50 miles from nowhere. Right, and so a poem is This City Now, 50 miles from nowhere, 9:09 in the morning, the taste of liquor and cigarettes. This is Bukowski talking about his day, the Los Angeles sprawl, the liquor and cigarettes at 9:09 in the morning because he's Bukowski, and all that, right? I think 50 miles from nowhere is an interesting line, not in the sense of a city, because that's fairly commonplace if you are from like very sprawling regions, but being 50 miles from nowhere in the context of poetry, right? I think with something like this poem, we have to look and say, anytime he's talking about the city, let's use this as a way to look at the poem. Any way he talks about a poem, let's use it to analyze the city, right? Because it's not interesting to say, he talks about the city in this way. Well, he's descriptive, like, that's an interesting thing. But, like, 50 miles from nowhere is just a descriptor of the city. It's a beautiful one. It's a poetic one. But what does that mean as poetry, right? To be 50 miles from nowhere. And I think that speaks to what poetry does. I think Bukowski in this line looks at poetry as, that's an M, a form and a means of connection, right? That if you are reading a poem, no matter where you are, if you are writing a poem, no matter what, you are in some way connected. Because we are connected through art. We talk about this a lot on stream. Art is not only connection, well, it's the precursor to that. It's communication, right? If we are communicating with a piece of art and through a piece of art, then we are fundamentally connected to something else, and we are then 50 miles from nowhere, right? He's also just talking about his morning. Overanalysis W. No police, no lovers walking the streets. This poem, this city, closing its doors, barricaded, almost empty, mournful without tears, aging without pity. The hard rock mountains, the ocean like a lavender flame. Sunrise? Well, sunrise is on the other side. A moon destitute of greatness. A small music from broken windows. A poem is a city, a poem is a nation, a poem is the world. This is maybe like the most hopeful thing I've ever seen Bukowski write, right? Like a poem is the world. Just because it speaks to the degree of connection in this work, right? But he shifts to talking about the city in front of him in this bottom half, and it makes it feel deeply personal, right? The things that he sees. But also, I'm sort of trying to understand what he means here. Maybe someone else has thoughts. As always, if y'all have thoughts, definitely interject. But he says, no police, no lovers walking the streets. That's fine. That's descriptive, right? But he says this poem, this city, closing its doors, right? And I don't quite know what that means. Barricaded, almost empty. Mournful without tears, aging without pity, right? These are the fascinating lines of the poem to me. Because these describe the city in a very, very, very strange way. Right? Especially given the energy before. Right? Well, 9:09 in the morning. Right? The city's waking up. And that's what I thought at first as well. This feels like the evening. And maybe if there's a jump in time to the evening, maybe this is why, that a poem is the city now, 50 miles from nowhere, 9:09 in the morning, taste of liquor and cigarettes, no police, no lovers walking the streets. Like, this is the morning, right? There's no energy, it's low, right? And then this poem, this city closing its doors, would be a sort of point of separation, which maybe that's what this is. Every time he talks about a poem or a city, right, we have some sort of separation, right? When he says a poem is a city filled with streets and sewers, filled with saints, heroes, beggars, madmen, filled with banality and booze, filled with rain and thunder, periods of drought, a poem is a city at war, right? This refers to everything until the next, a poem is a city, right? And then he moves through. So if we're following this pattern, right, we would maybe think that when he says this poem, this city, he's now referring to something else and not the same morning. So then if the city is closing its doors, if it's barricaded and almost empty, then it could, right, refer to the evening there, right? That's one of my thoughts as a way to read that with the structure. This is why structure is important, to make things clear. Maybe that's like a criticism here, is that that part's unclear. I literally have no idea. Maybe they move from describing the morning to describing the night. Yeah. There you go, Drowning Devil. Moon at 9 a.m. Yeah, that's an interesting one. So where does he say that? Down here, the moon, right? And that would fit because then this poem, this city, that section refers all the way down to here. The ocean like a lavender flame is referring to sunset. I think very clearly, having lived in California on the coast, when the sun is setting, the way that the ocean glows with the sunlight, that's a sunset description, absolutely, right? And so then maybe this is about the evening. I think that's what we do. And admittedly, the only thing we sort of have to go off of is him saying, this poem, this city. But so far, every time he has used a poem, it's delineating a new thought. A poem, new thought. Here, right? This poem, a poem. These are new thoughts, entirely separate. And if we are to continue in the pattern, which is what we should assume is done, then this is going to be an indicator of that. That feels reasonable to me. So then we go from the morning to the night, right? The interesting thing, right? Well, maybe, in a sense, if this is the morning and this is the night, then this all could actually be like the day at the top of the poem, right? Poem is a city filled with streets and sewers, right? The stuff going on, the action, the saints, the heroes, the beggars, the madmen, the banality, the booze, the rain, the thunder, drought, whatever, right? City asking a clock why. Maybe another hint that there's a broader theme of time in this poem that we haven't even touched on. But then burning under guns, drunks, whatever. And none of this has time, but it all has... Well, I guess there's dogs barking at night. Maybe this invalidates my points. But regardless, this is the action of the city, and this is the inaction of the city, is how I would look at it, right? And in the evening, this poem is a city closing its doors, barricaded, almost empty, right? And this would be, the city itself, the energy, the streets that we start with at the beginning are empty if, the houses are full, right? Poem maybe shows the city over a couple of days. Maybe, or at least it shows it in each time of day, where I'm not sure Bukowski is using like a chronological narrative here or anything, but he is signaling that there are many different times and places in the city. The entirety, the whole of the city, it makes sense, right? He doesn't forget any part of the city. The morning, the sunset, the nightlife, the day life, right? Bye, High Caliber. You tied your shoes too tight. Bye! Have a good one. So this maybe makes sense as a depiction, not as a part of the city, not as something, but as something in its entirety, which of course is going to fit with the continuation of the poem on the next page. A poem is a city, a poem is a nation, a poem is the world, right? And I don't think a poem is a nation, a poem is the world, would be nearly as impactful as it is in this poem without him first describing the entirety of the city, right? Because here we know that the poem can be everything in a space. Not that he's actually like given us any reason why it is, right? But then we can then expand, right? If I started by saying a poem is a city, a poem is a nation, a poem is the world, it's like, well, that's a big claim. That doesn't sound so reasonable. You're saying some big, strong, sweeping words, right? But if he can sort of justify that there is poetry in each part and every aspect of the city, it gives him some credibility in saying that, well, if it's in a city, it's in every city, it's in a nation. If it's in nations, it's in the world. There's sort of a logic there. I don't think Bukowski is illogical in his thought. He's often illogical in his action and the way he lives his life, but I don't think it's a reason to discard Bukowski as someone who does not think, right? Because he's very brilliant in his thought. We've covered this poem for almost 2 hours. That's interesting. Yeah, we have for almost 2 hours. We started like 20 minutes in, but yes, we've been on this for a while, and we are still on it, and are still going to be on it for like a little while longer. If you can't tell, I like this poem, having read it, and I'm only liking this poem more as we read it, which is dangerous. We're spiraling into oblivion. The insanity of poetry. Well, we derailed a bunch too. Yeah, that's always part of it, you know. You can indeed tell. Some of his work, some work, like work in general. I mean, poetry, guys. I'm gonna let you in on a little secret, about Stream and about my life. Okay, this is something that I haven't told anyone ever. It's very, 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 very concealed, very hidden information. It's a confession, if you will. I love poetry. I love poetry, y'all. The gasp. To everyone's surprise, I'm going to send this to the tabloids. Headlines: 2/3 Lotus likes poetry. Poet admits he actually enjoys what she does. Poet is not miserable. Poet does not hate poetry. Breaking news. Oh, this is great. This is so fun. Y'all caught me on a good day is all that happened. On other days, I wallow and stare at poems. I fucking hate poetry. But perhaps that's why a poem is like a city. Bukowski talks about poetry as something that fills his life, particularly in a sort of opposition against a difficult world, against a world of capitalism, against a world where he has to pay rent, right? A world of joy and a world of pain, right? And in that sense, and poetry, Bukowski maybe reacted in the same way. I think he did. I know he did, based on his writing and his speaking. You know, I just said it. I love poetry. And on other days I say, I hate poetry. Right? Like, I've said both of these things flat out and entirely seriously. We did stumble upon something. I hate poetry. And I love poetry. And like a city that can be alive at one time and dead at another, and then active and then banal, and drunk and sober, and burning while thriving, and beautiful God riding through the streets, and dogs tearing apart its soul, its flag at the night, and envy and bitterness and joy and rain, but also sun and water and drought and war, right? The city is all of that, and poetry is all of that, and art is all of that, is what Bukowski says. This poem says, I hate poetry. This poem says, I love poetry. This poem says, poetry helps me and it hurts me and it moves me forward and backwards, and poetry is the morning, the evening, the day, the night, the pain, the guns, the peace, the music. Right? This man's brilliant. So, this is why I like analysis. I read this at first and I'm like, yeah, this talks about poetry as a beautiful thing. But I learned something about myself here, right? And that this is not just me. And of course this could be projecting my ideas onto Bukowski's words, but that connection feels too strong. That clicked too much for it to not be true to me. I think all artists have a love-hate relationship with their art. I don't think I ever hate the art. I hate what makes me frustrated, which is often myself or the community. Yeah. And that's good. I hope that continues, right? But I also think that like, I have written poetry in a space of hatred. And I've written poetry, self-hatred mostly, outward hatred occasionally. That's the projection. I've written poetry in love. I've written poetry in joy and elation. I've written poetry in sadness and depression. Right? And in that way, a poem is a city. Interestingly, a city also provides, right? A city provides for us, right? We can go out into the city and find what we need. We can theoretically find work. We can find camaraderie. We can find beauty. It is a great black pen. I really like these pens. They're Tool. Tool, if you would like to sponsor me. There's actually something I want to pursue once I'm bigger. Like, I want freaking Pilot to sponsor me and send me pens, because I use pens on stream, like, once I have an audience. Sell out, make money. But mostly I want free pens. Yes, this Tool colored pen set, they all match. They're really nice felt fine pens. And they're they're the ultra fine. And it's not that they're like nice, they're not expensive. You can get these at like this set probably at like any office supply store. But as 8 colors. The other one is yellow, it just doesn't show up on the thing. See, yeah, the Sharpie pen's the problem with me is that they're too strong and they bleed through too much. These, like, a Sharpie pen would bleed way more than this is, right? I was saying a city provides. You can find anything you need in a city. And in the same way, writing poetry, it can provide for I'll use gel pens, okay. It can provide for you. I was thinking like the Sharpie fine liners. I think I have one. The fine Sharpies. But yeah, like, to an artist at least, like, I can relate to this. And I bet there are lots of people who would look at what I'm saying here and think that I'm an absolute crazy person. Not you all, because you've been around stream, but who would say, what are you talking about? It's just like silly words on a page. But like to the artist, art is life. A Drowning Devil. You write about bedrooms and houses and spaces. I think this is Bukowski in a way doing what you do, right? In his way, in a way that only Bukowski can. Because he writes about the way that this space, the city, is a thing that affects his life and affects his work and reflects not only that. Not only does it affect him, but his poetry is the city. It is the space in which he resides, and vice versa. Right? Trying to figure out if when I get home I can keep stream up or introduce my stepdaughter to you since I'll be cooking. Get her on stream. Yes. Does she like writing at all? Yeah, so Drawing Devil, in that way, this reminds me of your poems. And your poems remind me of that. She hates to read. Oh, tragic. 15. Someday I'll be her cool aunt. And I say that just in like a like a found family aunt thing where I'll teach her poetry from the other side of an internet screen, and she'll think I'm cool. But until then, she can go hate reading. Probably grilled cheese sandwiches, tomato soup. No, that sounds like a vibe, honestly. The banger. Probably gonna throw some broccoli at them. There you go. Ideally, put it in the soup. Kids don't like vegetables because people don't season them well. I was born to be the weird aunt. Yeah, same. I mean, look at me. I didn't like reading or writing until I was 18. I didn't like reading or writing until I was 19. This was not me. This is like me of the last year. 15 months I have been a poet. 15 months I have been a writer. I did like reading, but I was like a fantasy fan. Yeah, okay. That's interesting. Very interesting. So yeah. And maybe you don't see the relation yourself here, Drowning Devil, to like your work. But like, I think I would, if I were you, take inspiration from works like this. It's good. Also, once again, recommending that you locate a copy of the Rybczynski book. Not sure I see the relation, but I do appreciate the idea. Fair enough. We're far in. You're looking for a PDF still? Yeah, it's a hard book to find. It's not a popular book. And now I stick this under glass. I dropped the book. Oh no. I didn't realize it was that loud. I'm sorry. So now I stick this under glass for the gaunt, mad editor's scrutiny. This is me. And night is elsewhere, and faint grey ladies stand in line. Dog follows dog to estuary. The trumpets bring on gallows, and small men rant at things they cannot do. So this is the really the only way Bukowski could end this poem. And I think it's brilliant. This is a funny thud. Okay. And we're going to talk about the last stanza, the last 8 lines, this little octet at the end. And I think talk about how it wraps everything up. I do think LA is by an estuary, yes, or LA kind of is an estuary. But I'm going to run this ad. It's a very Bukowski way to end the poem. And I think there is a literal estuary. And I wouldn't be surprised. But we can look it up. But I'm going to run this ad, go to the bathroom again. I've been drinking lots of water, which is good. And then I'll come back and we'll finish out this poem in like 2.5 hours time. Total. Not from then. Welcome back. It's me, the only trans girl who's ever written a poem. So hopefully we'll be back in about 20 minutes. Gotta clock out, get home, and so on. Have a good one. If you're back, awesome. If you aren't able to come back, no worries. So, what is the end of this poem? And now I stick this under glass. This line is so... it's defeated. This is sad. This is a sad, awful, awful, awful ending. I think this should take the wind out of our sails. Awful in a good way. Awful in an emotional way. Yes. I find this to be so sad. And now I stick this under glass. Under observation. Right? It is no longer the living, breathing thing of his writing before, of the moment. It is not the beauty of Hi King Poyo philosophy question: if a butterfly falls in love, does it get humans as it's in its stomach? I see it as like a reference to seeing something in a museum, something to be remembered for all of time. And that's why I think it's sad, Drowning Devil. Because we are left to observe this thing from afar. In a sense, while a poem is a city, a poem does not give us the city. And the city does not give us the poetry. Right? We can look at the poem and look at it as we are even now and pick at it and pull things apart. But sort of out of its context of being written at 9:07 in the morning in Los Angeles, with the remembrance of last night, the rebirth of this morning, the poem becomes sort of dead in a way, I think. See, it is more of a happy thing, because while you can't have it, very least you can get a glimpse. Sure. I don't think Bukowski sees it that way, though. Here's why. For the gaunt, mad editor's scrutiny. Right? He does say this is for the editor, right? So it's not just the glass of a museum of broad observation. It's about the publication. It's about turning this perfect fragment of art into something contained, to something approximated, particularly probably with the editor's scrutiny. And night is elsewhere. Here's why. Yeah, I do think that sounds cool just from skimming it. Night is elsewhere, right? The joy, the fierce nature of the city night, the dogs, the drinking, the bar fights, the Bukowski poetry readings, the sewers, the people on the street, the dancing, the lovers. Elsewhere. Not here. And faint gray ladies stand in line. Faint. Whenever Bukowski's talking about a woman, right, he would normally talk about them very vividly, but they're faint, they're distant, they are not attainable in this poem, standing in line, arranged, that sort of banal life. Dog follows dog to estuary. The trumpets bring on gallows, right? The end of this is not a celebration and a preservation of the poem, I think the end of this poem is an execution. A sort of poetic suicide enacted by the work itself. The poem is a simulacrum of the experience he had, yes. So, the trumpets bring on gallows. As small men rant at things they cannot do. Perhaps the editor, talking about analysis not being art, right? Someone who can critique and pull apart, not even critique, but edit and change something he does not understand, right? But also I think small men ranting at things they cannot do is also a line that speaks to like the fundamental condition of like capitalism and the 9 to 5 that Bukowski abhors. Just kind of going about things, moving around. Even dog follows dog is this sort of like mindlessness of just following what is in front of you, ranting at things we cannot do instead of doing. Inaction, gray, standing in line is where he sends this poem to be. And maybe he also sees this as the fate of the poem upon its dissemination to the world, that no one will get it. The poem dies with him because the interpretation of the others is an execution, because the others will see this as a positive thing, that poetry is just communication. They would stop, maybe he says, here, where we were an hour ago in analysis. Because people will be inspired by this, and it'll make poets, and they'll want to write about cities. I can imagine Bukowski saying this. But that's not the poem. And thus it dies. Which, if this is the interpretation, if this is what Bukowski thought, right, when he wrote this, and this is what I've pulled from it, then in a sense, the pause was long because I was thinking, and I was impacted myself by what I said. If this is true, if this is what Bukowski meant, then I have in some way, as a analyst, seen what he hoped people would see through his work, which is maybe the point of the art of analysis, right? The art of analysis is not to find exactly what structure works in what way, how to bring about the thought, right? Analysis to me is to look at a work and say, how can I see this person through it? And if analysis is art, then this is the greatest piece that I've created, right? I don't think I've been so completely content with analysis of a poem as I am with this one, right? And that's probably in some way due to the cumulative aspect of this, right? Every time I read Bukowski, I learn a little more of him. He speaks more, I get to understand more, and I can speak with more confidence on what I think he means, right? And it's funny because we didn't dig into the city under guns, the city burning, the Lady Godiva, the city of poets, right? These lines, so many of these lines we didn't even touch. But I think it's because, as I see it, there are much larger things to this poem, and I would be the gaunt, mad editor being so scrupulous and saying, why do we say the city burning and the city under guns here? This is what the editor would do. They would look at the way things are formatted, phrased, put together, the technique of this, right? But I don't think that's analysis. I'm not gaunt. Exactly. I must not be the gaunt, mad editor. Maybe mad. Maybe I've demonstrated some complete madness, right? I sort of see a picture of myself in other people's heads, which is so funny to say that, even though I can't see pictures in my head, but I can see the other person picturing something that's messed up. That's too many presumptions. Of them looking at me like the person with the red string on the cork board, putting together these nonsensical theories about a man who just likes the city, right? And likes poetry, and thus put them together in a poem, right? Some would say, well, Bukowski's not that philosophical, which he is. Bukowski's not that smart. You give him too much credit, you overanalyze, you project your own ideas into his work. Yes, I do. But that's the art. Art is a communication. Analysis is art. Analysis is communication. And communication is two ways. So I have to provide something, and that's my experience. And that's why I love and treasure analysis, because it's collaborative. Me and the text. And I wish, right, I could bring Bukowski from the grave and just show him this and say, well, what do you think? What do you think about this? Or see his reaction. Mostly because I wonder if Bukowski would say, you dumb shit, I'm writing about the city and how I like it. You're just as bad as the editor, right? But I'd hope that Bukowski would sort of look at it and say, like, wow, this person really, like, dogs. Not only got something from my work, but also, like, added something to it, hopefully, right? This is what we hope to do. As analysts, at least. But as poets, I think we want to be able to give a space for dialogue. So we write something that can be grappled with and engaged with in this way, right? And it kind of makes sense. The more I like a poem, the more I go into it. Maybe the good poem is the poem that grabs the person, by the shoulders and doesn't let them go, or makes them grab the poem and not let it go, right? A poem is good if it sits in the mind. A poem is good if you can't escape it. A poem is valuable if, I don't know, by the dialogues that it creates. I like that. I think that makes sense. Now, does anyone have questions about all of this? Does someone want to come in and point at a line and say, this one undermines your entire thought about this poem, start over? Or does someone want to come in and say, I don't like this poem, which is fine too? Obviously, I love this poem. And you know that because I basically just said I like it, because I said the things we like are the things that capture us for time. Still confused about the time jumps. I think it just doesn't... morning to night. Yeah, and I think you're maybe looking at it too literally, is how I would maybe say. Just to know that, he's obviously talking about night, right? Ocean and lavender flame. He's obviously talking about morning, 9:09 in the morning, right? And that's all that really matters, right? Because the point, as we sort of looked at, or my point, my interpretation of his point, is to describe the entirety of the city. And he doesn't need to go in chronological order. He doesn't need to go from morning to day to evening to night, right? He just touches on it to bring in more to the poem, right? So whether the closing doors are talking about the morning, like, I think all of that is just sort of fluffy imagery on the city to bring you to the point that he's encompassed the whole thing, right? And maybe a certain amount of vagueness is required if you're trying to capture something so large, that you have to make these massive things, massive statements, right? Saints, heroes, beggars, madmen, a city burning, a city under guns, right? A poem is a city asking a clock why. We didn't even talk about that line. And that's probably one of my favorite lines in the poem, just because I'm still not quite sure what a city asking a clock why is, right? But I think it's these metaphorical and symbolic vagaries that just show that we should encompass. I think you're trying to read too much in the time jumps. You're not allowed to read in too much, Stylish Fail, or you're going to be the scrupulous mad editor. Don't be the scrupulous mad editor. Just get the emotions, the vibes. But not even that, because I did much more than emotions and vibes. I connected all of them. But I think maybe the scrupulous mad editor would be like, well, no, what is this saying? What is this pointing to, right? Why doesn't the time make sense here? And I think Bukowski says that's, like, in that line, he says that's the wrong way to look at this poem. Statically, right? I don't really believe in reading too much into it, but got on the wrong track. Like, there is too much, there is no over-analysis. You might be surprised to hear that I don't believe that there is too much over-analysis either. I think we can analyze, and if we're getting value, then it's good. Maybe we've over-analyzed once we stop enjoying analysis, right? That's a reasonable hypothesis. Once we're not making art, right? There is over-analysis in the same way that you can spend too long painting a piece or writing a poem. Analysis is done when the piece of art is done. I like that. And there is a sense of knowing. Like, when I hit those long pauses at the end and said, like, the end of this poem is an execution, my analysis was over, right? And I knew it because the art was over. And I even ended it in a poignant way to say that it's an execution. But I don't agree with the it's not that deep sentiment that sometimes happens. Yeah, and I don't see a reason why we should be dismissive of analysis and that we're looking too deep. I agree with that. Like, why not let it be deep, right? That's, again, like, the conversational element of analysis and art is that, well, if we make it deep and get depth out of it, then that's our piece of the art. If we're shallow in our looking at it, then that's fine too. I think it's funny. Someone says, like, it's not that deep. I think that's probably a really good retort. That's awfully shallow of you. Because I think we have an idea. Like, shallowness tends to be a sort of insult. Being shallow is not good. So if anyone tells you, like, it's not that deep, just tell them that they're being pretty fucking shallow when they say that, and that'll shut them up, probably. Some sass there. I don't normally have that much sass, but Some good sass. A poem is a city. Unless we have any other questions. We'll read it again. I might read it twice. If there are no other questions. Or we'll read it again and then y'all can formulate. And I'll read it again because I like this poem a lot. A Poem is a City by Charles Bukowski. A poem is a city filled with streets and sewers, filled with saints, heroes, beggars, madmen, filled with banality and booze, filled with rain and thunder and periods of drought. A poem is a city at war. A poem is a city asking a clock, why? A poem is a city burning. A poem is a city under guns, its barbershops filled with cynical drunks. A poem is a city where God rides naked through the streets like Lady Godiva, where dogs bark at night and chase away the flag. A poem is a city of poets, most of them quite similar, and envious and bitter. A poem is this city now, 50 miles from nowhere, 9:09 in the morning, the taste of liquor and cigarettes. No police, no lovers walking the streets. This poem, this city, closing its doors, barricaded, almost empty, mournful without tears, aging without pity. The hard rock mountains, the ocean like a lavender flame, a moon destitute of greatness, a small music from broken windows. A poem is a city. A poem is a nation. A poem is the world. And now I stick this under glass for the gaunt, mad editor's scrutiny. And night is elsewhere, and faint gray ladies stand in line. Dog follows dog to estuary. The trumpets bring on gallows, as small men rant at things they cannot do. A Poem is the World by Charles Bukowski. I know y'all can't see my face that well, but you might have seen me light up in the middle. Envious and bitter. A poem is a city of poets, most of them quite similar and envious and bitter. I think that really it clicks with all of what I said for me. It contextualizes so much things. The not seeing, the envious of the speaking in a way that describes the things. A Poem is a City by Charles Bukowski. A poem is a city filled with streets and sewers, filled with saints, heroes, beggars, madmen, filled with banality and booze, filled with rain and thunder and periods of drought. A poem is a city at war. A poem is a city asking a clock why. A poem is a city burning. A poem is a city under guns, its barbershops filled with cynical drunks. A poem is a city where God rides naked through the streets like Lady Godiva, where dogs bark at night and chase away the flag. A poem is a city of poets, most of them quite similar, and envious and bitter. A poem is this city now, 50 miles from nowhere, 9:09 in the morning, the taste of liquor and cigarettes, no police, no lovers walking the streets. This poem, this city closing its doors, barricaded, almost empty, mournful without tears, aging without pity. the hard rock mountains, the ocean like a lavender flame, a moon destitute of greatness, a small music from broken windows. A poem is a city, a poem is a nation, a poem is the world. And now I stick this under glass for the gaunt, mad editor's scrutiny, and night is elsewhere. And faint gray ladies stand in line, dog follows dog to estuary. The trumpets bring on gallows as small men rant at things they cannot do. A poem is the world's by Charles Bukowski. What a work. What a brilliant poem. I mean, I would say I'm speechless, but I had a lot to say. Thank you, Stylish Phil. That's a poem. That's a poem and a half. I mean, if we're going by length of analysis, it's 2 poems. It was funny doing the analysis and being like an hour and a half in, and I'm like, I'm on like halfway through the second section. We're not even on the back page, like realizing like, oh, this is a task. But I think the poem deserves that, if anything, right?
Thanks for listening to me and my thoughts on Bukowski. Make sure to check out the rest of the series if you enjoyed, and follow or stop by Twitch if you want to see more. See you there.